Merħba għal dan ir-raba' episodju mit-tieni sensiela ta' The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast. Illum se nkunu qegħdin nitkellmu dwar strateġija ġdida tal-Kummissjoni Ewropea, l-Startups and Scale-up Strategy, strateġija illi għadha proposta imma permezz tagħha l-Kummissjoni Ewropea tixtieq li tnaqqas il-burokrazija, ttejjeb il-qafas regolatorju u tiffaċilita l-aċċess għal finanzjament għal startups u scale-ups. Illum għandna mistidda magħna mill-Kummissjoni Ewropea mid-Direttorat Ġenerali għar-Riċerka u l-Innovazzjoni lil Valentina di Girolamo. Se nissiltu l-preżentazzjoni tagħha minn webinar illi għamlet bħala webinar li kien organizzat mill-Malta Business Bureau u li fih titkellem dwar l-anijiet ewlenin ta' din l-istrateġija xi tfisser għall-ambjent tan-negozju fl-Ewropa u se naraw daqsxejn kif jista' jiġi applikat ukoll f'Malta. Insegwu flimkien dan il-podcast. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġjub lilkom minn Reaps Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll bl-għajnuna ta' Finance Malta.
My name is Valentina Di Girolamo and I work for DG Research and Innovation, and I'm also a member of the task force that prepared the EU Startup and Scale-up Strategy that I will be presenting to you in a few seconds. The idea today is first of all to start by giving you an idea of what is the vision that the strategy is pursuing. And after that, I would like to walk you through the different challenges that we identified. Some of them have already been mentioned, but I would like to give you a bit more details on the approach that we adopted while identifying these key bottlenecks. And then I will present the building blocks of the strategy that mirror these challenges and how we and what type of actions we proposed in order to address them. So with this in mind, let's start from the vision and also from let's say a reality check. We know that in the European Union we have many strengths. Our single market have made remarkable progress over time and is an important engine for growth. But indeed, many challenges still remain that de facto hinders our ability to untap the full potential of our economy. And this is particularly relevant when it comes to startup and scale-up company. We need to admit that Europe today does not maybe appear as the most appealing place, maybe not to launch a business, but for sure to grow businesses and the tech-driven companies. And so the main purpose of the strategy is to change this narrative and make Europe indeed the best place where we can not only launch business, but we also can make them scale up and become competitive on the global market. Now, in order to achieve this objective, what we need is a shift in our economic model. So here the ambition is to really nurture our entrepreneurial ecosystem, supporting companies not only through their launching phase, but also allowing them and providing them with the support they need when growing, and also by ensuring that the innovative solutions that they develop can be successfully commercialized, can find a market when where to be deployed. And this is critical because, as mentioned also before, a thriving startup and scale-up ecosystem is crucial for productivity growth, for creating good quality jobs, attracting the right talent, and investment. All key ingredients that we cannot overlook if we want to boost and strengthen our competitiveness on a global scale. So what was the approach that we adopted when preparing the strategy? So first of all, we tried to look at the different bottlenecks that the innovative companies, especially startup and scale-ups, face throughout their entire life cycles. And we focus on these bottlenecks in the market area by area. And as mentioned, we identified, let's say, 5 pillars, 5 key areas. First of all, let me start with the regulatory and regulatory framework, regulatory and bureaucratic burdens. Let's say that when we think about the regulatory framework in the European Union, I don't know for you, but for me, one of the first keywords that come to mind is fragmentation. And indeed, our innovative companies are faced with 27 different regulatory frameworks, 27 different reporting requirements, taxation obligation, employment conditions, and so on. And this significant degree of fragmentation obviously is an important limitation to growth and development. Additionally, we also need to be clear that despite the progress that have been made, also as pertains, the regulatory systems, our regulatory architecture is still pretty slow, especially in adapting to, in adapting to new technologies, or more in general to the fast pace of innovation. Then we have access to finance, so money. We know that startups and scale-ups and innovative companies in general need a significant amount of resources. And unfortunately, our financial market remains still underdeveloped. And also here, the presence of different national measures that rule different aspects of private investment does not help. Additionally, when we look at the venture capital market of the EU, we can observe over time, we have been observing over time some positive trends, but this has not been enough to put us on par with our main counterparts, for instance, the United States. And especially when we compare ourselves to the United States, we see that the gap is very significant at all financing stages, but is more pronounced for the scale-up phase. So when we look at the late stage financing. Obviously, it's not only about money. As mentioned before, another key struggle is to ensure a successful commercialization of our research results, so the innovative solution that our companies develop. And so the other area that we identified as an important area of action is the one related to ensuring good access to market, good commercialization of results, and innovation adoption. Also keeping in mind that an important role in this regard must be played also by public procurement, for which the participation of startup and scale-up companies is still particularly low. And then there is talent, which is a key ingredient. Startup and scale-up companies cannot survive unless they can tap into the right pool of skilled individuals. Now, when we talk about talent, there are different elements that need to be part of the reflections. First of all, we reflected on the fact on whether we are able to, produce the right talent, so to keep our professional with the right skills that are needed and demanded by startup and scale-ups. And if that is the case, the other question is whether we then are able to allow this individual to find the right match on the job market. And on top of being able to retaining our talent, there is also the question on whether we are attractive enough to talent coming also from third non-EU countries. So in our reflection, in the preparation of the strategies, we took all these elements into account. And last but not least, access to infrastructure, network, and services. Also here, the access to research and technology infrastructure within the EU remains difficult, as well as access to business acceleration services, coaching, and networking support that are critical for startup and scale-ups. So this is, let's say, the diagnosis, so the challenges that we identified, and after, past the problem solving, the problem definition phase, the approach that we adopted was to structure the strategy along this dimension, and according to the different needs that we identified, the needs that are identified throughout the entire life cycles of the companies. And so we shape the strategy and its actions along this dimension. And what I'm going to do now is to give you an overview of what type of actions we had in mind. Obviously, for time purposes, I will not be able to go through the details of each and every action, but I will try my best, to give you a comprehensive overview, and then obviously I'm happy to reply any questions you might have. So let's start to access to finance, so to the need of a better finance. As said before, we need to reduce the financing gap, especially for scale-ups, so at growth stage. And here, the first point that I want to mention is that we acknowledge the important role that so far has been played by the European Innovation Council. So the EIC will keep being part of the solution, and the idea is to expand it, make it easier to access, and so overall more impactful. However, we know that the EIC alone is not enough, cannot be enough to solve the problem that we face. So what the Commission proposes is to deploy, as part of the EIC fund, a Scale Up Europe fund, because we need to ensure the large tickets are available to innovative companies. So the idea is to deploy this new fund that will mobilize a significant amount of private investment, and will target strategic sectors of high priorities mostly. Then there is also another element when it comes to access to finance. We cannot overlook the role that must be played by institutional investors. So we will not be able to unlock the funding that we need unless institutional investors are in the game. And so with this in mind, and in order to mobilize them, the idea is to, in collaboration with the institutional investors, to set up an European Innovation Investment Pact in order to incentivize large institutional investors to invest their asset under management into funds of funds, venture capital funds, and unlisted scale-ups. Then under this, let's say this pillar, this flagship, we also included other type of actions that also foresee some legislative improvements. Some of them are already underway, like for instance the review of the definition of undertaking in difficulties and the review of the horizontal and non-horizontal merger guidelines. Additionally, we also want to, as much as possible, to improve and strengthen the connections with individuals that are there available to support our companies. So we like to strengthen the channels for making the role of European business angels and access to European business angels easier. Then we move to regulation. Well, let's say here maybe the action that attracted most of the interest is the proposal on this 28th regime, which will provide a single set of rules for companies. As I mentioned before, fragmentation is a crucial obstacle. So the main objective of the 28th regime will be to try to smoothen, let's say, this fragmentation, providing, as I said, a single set of rules, and it will be based on digital by default solutions that will help startup and scale up companies to set up their business more quickly, to scale up, but also will make easier for them to operate within the single market, so across member states. Then echoing what was saying at the beginning in the introduction, here there is a role also that will play by the upcoming European Innovation Act that will promote regulatory sandboxes so that startup and scale-up companies will be able to test their ideas. Will be able to test their ideas, before getting in the market. And on top of that, obviously, in general, we foresee actions that will aim at simplification, reducing regulatory burdens, also in strategic sectors, although overall the strategy remains to some extent sector agnostic. And then we will also launch a study on corporate restructuring, because one of key aspects that we need to take into account is the idea of reducing the cost of failures for our companies that remains pretty high. Fast market uptake and expansion, as I said before, ensuring the successful commercialization of the innovative solutions that our companies produced is key. And here we have, let's say, two main actions. One is the Lab to Unicorn initiatives that encompasses, let's say, several sub-actions, but the overall aim is to strengthen connections in the local ecosystem. So, for instance, by leveraging on the role of already well-established European startup and scale hubs that are already well-rooted in the local ecosystem. So they have good ties with research institutions and the universities, but also the idea is also to provide, let's say, more legal guidance and implementation guidance on, for instance, the applicable state aid rules. And then, as I mentioned before, there is also a role to be played by public procurement. So also in this case, the upcoming legislative proposals will try to revise the current public procurement directives in order to take into account the needs of startup and scale-up companies. Then we arrive to talent. Here again, several actions, several initiatives. We can summarize them into two key blocks. The first one is the blue carpet initiatives, and the second one is the favor labor mobility package. So now the blue carpet initiatives, the main aim is to support the attraction and the retention of highly skilled and diverse talent, not only from the European Union, but also from non-EU countries. And as part of these initiatives, we will focus on different aspects. First of all, we will try to strengthen the entrepreneurial education and the capability of upskilling through the EIT, but we will also propose initiatives to, for instance, eliminate tax obstacles for remote cross-borders employees for startup and scale-ups, but also the promotion of best practices that will include, for instance, the harmonization of certain aspect of employment treatment and so on. Now, to retain and attract talent from, let's say, third countries, we'll also work on a EU visa strategy in order to strengthen that, but also we'll also leverage on already existing initiatives to try them, make them fit best for a better fit for the needs of startup scale-ups. And here I'm referring, for instance, to the EU Blue Card Directive. Last but not least, access to infrastructure, network, and services. Here again, a key role will be played by the upcoming European Innovation Act that will, make proposal to promote access of innovation for innovation companies to European research and technology infrastructures. And also in this case, the idea is to provide guidance and legal guidance and implementation guidance on what are the applicable state aid rules for university and public organization that want to grant access to their infrastructures. Now, so this is more or less the overview. I know that I skipped some of the actions, but of course we can get back to them. Then another key element is that how we will measure the progress in the implementation phase, because as was mentioned before, implementation is good to announce the strategies, but then implementation is key. So here, in order to measure progress, there are different actions that have been proposed. First of all, the Commission will work on developing a common definition of startup, scale-ups, and innovative companies, building on existing definitions also for innovative SMEs. And this is clear because the first aspect that comes to mind when talking about startup and scale-ups is how we define them, and this is a key aspect in order to ensure like more homogeneous treatment across the European Union. Then we will also launch an annual startup and scale-up survey in order to monitor and assess what is the perception from the key stakeholders, from the companies, because the contact with the stakeholders will be key also in the implementation phase. And then we will also establish an European startup and scale-up scoreboard with the aim of monitoring progresses. And this will be done by taking into account a series of quantitative indicators and impact indicators, looking at, for instance, just to give you an example, the number of scale-ups, unicorns that emerge in the European Union, and so on. And now I think I am on time, so I would actually conclude here.
The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġġub lilkom minn Reaps Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll bl-għajnuna ta' Finance Malta.
Great. Thank you very much, Valentina, for your detailed insights on this strategy. We heard some very interesting points. I think most pertinent to me are the Scale Up Europe Fund, expanding the EIC. We also heard about the European Business Wallet and also the Blue Carpet Initiative to retain and to bring talents towards Europe, and so much more. So thank you very much once again for that. We do have a couple of questions from our audience, from Mr. Adrian G, who is commenting about the short-term and long-term targets of the strategy, mainly the 28th regime, which is something I wanted to ask you about myself. Obviously, with regards to the 28th regime, this sounds like a very practical tool on paper, and we've heard of similar initiatives many times in the past, such as the Societas Privata Europea in 2008 and the single-member company, the SUP, in 2014, that all promoted a similar concept. However, they did not really succeed in the long term. So what will be different now with the strategy? And then we will take the other questions from Mr. Adrian.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And indeed, it's true that in the past, similar initiatives have faced difficulties, especially in negotiation level. So I understand the concerns. Now, let's say, first of all, that you, of course, may know that we are now at the public consultation phase for the 28th regime. So I cannot share the details, pretty much because there is still no proposal. We're working on it. But I would like to mention two key points. So first of all, despite the difficulties that we encountered in the past, we need to keep in mind that now we are in a very different moment. In the meantime, both the political and the economic context have changed, and I would say that now we can agree that there is a renewed sense of urgency on focusing on EU competitiveness. And in order to boost EU competitiveness, we cannot overlook the fact that we need to reduce administrative burdens for EU companies. So this is a mandatory step. We cannot escape that. So let's say that these, new political awareness, in my case, in my opinion, is different. It's more encouraging compared to what maybe we observed in the past. And I believe that this should, to some extent, help also avoid the struggles that we faced in earlier attempts. But on top of this, I also would like to mention that if we look at the development in EU company law, that has also significantly changed compared to earlier attempts. Now we have, different measures already in place. For instance, fully online procedures to set up companies, but also more harmonized procedures for cross-border mobilities of EU companies that also include, provisions and obligations that are able to safeguard employees and against abuses. And these are all developments that address some of the concerns that in the past have been kind of a bottleneck for previous initiatives. So to reply to your question, I would say that the key difference here with the key ingredient in order to avoid what happened in earlier attempts would be to combine practical solutions, so solutions that take into account the needs of the stakeholders, mainly companies, with politically feasible strategies, politically feasible recipes. And in order to do that, one key element would be, in my opinion, to leverage of the results that have already been achieved that should smoothen the way also for the negotiations.
Great. Okay. And we also have some more questions about the working with insurance institutions and private pensions on allocating funds to risk assets such as private equity and venture capital, and also the stance of the EIB on decentralizing decision making at investment level. So with regards to the EIB not remaining a direct investor, but rather becoming a capital allocator of funds, focusing on diverse critical areas for growth. Can you tell us a bit more about these elements of insurance and private equity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as mentioned also during the presentation, the strategy acknowledges that we cannot really address the challenges that we face, especially when it comes to the financing gap, if we don't bring institutional investors into the game. And this is the idea behind the initiatives of the Institutional Investor Pact. So here the idea is to work closely in contact with this type of investors that have the resources and try to incentivize them to invest them in funds of funds, venture capital funds, and so on. Obviously, this will be done not only as part of the strategy, but also in complementarity, like complementing also other initiatives and legislative proposals that are already underway. I'm thinking, for instance, the initiatives that have been proposed under the saving and investment unions and so on. So this is definitely under our radar and is a key aspect that we acknowledge, and we are actively working to make this work and to make it effective. Now, when it comes to the role of the EIF and the EIB, on this, let's be clear, we are proposing, for instance, the scale up fund and so on. We are proposing instruments that will be complementary on the one existing. We have been working in close collaboration with the EIB, and the EIB group has played a key role in supporting and channeling financing resources into our companies. Now we need to strengthen this and make it more effective, and to some extent also increase the reach of the actions. And the main difference, let's say, from initiatives that are now managed under the EIB and what we are proposing in the strategy, is that the scale-up fund will be direct investment instruments, while the EIB and the EIB group typically works with indirect type of investment. So this will be first the difference, but also if you see what I mean, this is also a source of complementarity. Additionally, the instrument that we are proposing will also allow us to be a bit more targeted, focusing a bit more on very high risky companies, that to some extent this is still a bit limited. I'm not saying that, of course, in the EIB group they don't, the instruments that we have now in place do not target high risk company, but the idea of having a fund that will be private managed, so we'll have a critical role played by private investors, will help us to make a step further in this direction.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Valentina. I have a couple of more questions, but seeing that we are moving quite a lot in time, I ask you to be a bit more concise on these questions. We have some questions about access to finance, for example. So Mr. Martin Mercia asks, what are the target strategic sectors mentioned within the section of access to finance? I also have a question about what kind of mechanisms will be applied to ensure that startups from across the EU, including small peripheral countries such as ourselves, how can they access the support, and how will the Commission be tracking the flow of funds to ensure a more balanced distribution? And my final question on access to funds is if there are any timelines on how this will be implemented, and if there de minimis rules will be applied for the Europe Scale Up Fund and other financing opportunities.
Okay, so in order, you said
It was a lot.
the access to finance, how these will reach small ecosystem, and how, yeah, perfect. So and the strategic sectors. So first of all, the strategy is to some extent, as I mentioned before, sector agnostic. So it's not tailored to specific strategic sectors. However, some of the actions naturally suggest that some sectors, especially in deep tech industries, will maybe more easily targeted by some of these actions. And then despite remaining, let's say, sector agnostic, as I said, we also foresaw some specific actions that target more specifically, for instance, the defense industry. But I would say that in any case, the approach here is not to focus on some sector specifically, but to have a more comprehensive strategy. Then about the small scale ecosystem, keeping this in mind, so the fact that some actions will more naturally be targeted towards strategic sectors, I would say that it would be kind of likely for companies that breakthrough innovation companies that show a high potential in sectors that are of key priorities for the EU to remain outside the attention zone of EIC, EIB, Invest EU, implementing counterparts. This being said, though, I think we need to be honest that at least so far we indeed have had a bit of a struggle to reach out to small ecosystems. When we look at our outreach tools, indeed, I must say that they may appear a bit too static, and to some extent allow me to say maybe more tailored or more appealing to a larger audiences. But I think that there is still some instruments that have worked quite well, and I'm thinking, for instance, that the EEN, so the Entrepreneurs Europe Network, and this, for instance, is a type of instrument that could be further leveraged on in order to create contact points between smaller ecosystem investors and so on. And then another thing that I want to mention is that not only for access to finance, but more in general, one of the key characteristics of this strategy is it's a strong digital footprint. So we really want to develop solutions that are digital by default, and these I think would help also to improve to broaden, let's say, the outreach and make it easier to access across the European Union. This being said, obviously still a work in progress, and we hope to improve every tool that is still available. And now, in terms of implementation, we are still working on it. So now I am no position to give you an exact timeline. You can see from what is written in the strategy that some actions will be developed quite quickly. Some of them are already foreseen for the first quarter of 2026. As concerns, for instance, the Scale Up Fund, this will be implemented with no prejudice to the current MFF. So we're still working on it. Unfortunately, I don't have any more details now on the specificities, but that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Valentina. I'm just going to ask you two final questions very quickly. First of all, the first one is with regards to the Blue Carpet Initiative by Ms. Anne-Marie, who asks, how does the EU define blue carpet treatment for startups, and will there be any framework to apply the blue carpet principles across all member states? That's the first question.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I must say that, okay, this is maybe a bit outside my field of expertise, but I can tell you what have been the discussion so far. So the idea is to, as I said before, the Blue Carpet initiatives take into account different, encompasses different measures. So, for instance, we will develop now whether how this will look like in practice. We will see, but I can tell you more details on the different sub initiatives that for now are under our radar. So, for instance, we will develop the blueprint for academic career development framework that will foresee rewards for research commercialization activities, including transition from university to industry and back. Now we need to tailor all of these to startup and scale up needs. And this is our main focus. There are many initiatives now that now don't take into account specifically the need of our innovative companies. So this will be the focus of our actions. Maybe, I don't know if you want to know in details something specifically. There is still no, let's say, over comprehensive framework now on the paper. We are working on it. But if you have a look at the different actions and the different area that we aim at targeting, the message is clear. Also, existing initiatives that already have produced some results will be revised to the extent possible in order to better tailor them to the need of startup and scale-ups if they are not taking them into account sufficiently, as of today.
Okay, excellent. So one final question, I promise. This is with regards to venture capital. So
sorry, just one point.
course.
Maybe on this, since this may be more like fall under the remit of the GMPOL than the DGRTD. Obviously, I'm happy also to follow up if there is more, more details are needed.
Yes, please. We'll send you the questions afterwards, and perhaps you can even send us
Sure.
some more details afterwards. That sounds
Absolutely,
amazing.
would happy to.
So just to move on to the final question before we move on to our panel discussion, this is with regards to the venture capital gap. Obviously, there's a massive gap when compared to the US. For example, in the EU, bank assets are around 200% of GDP when compared to 85% in the US. So we see quite a significant gap there. How will the strategy address this gap, particularly with the United States?
Yeah, well, so here the idea is that the strategy is proposing, actions or anyway, like pointing to the direction to take in order to address this gap. Obviously, we have no magic wand. It's not a small gap to be filled up, but we believe that through, for instance, the expansion of the AIC and the support of these complementary instruments that will tap into private investment and try to increase as much as possible the role of institutional investors, we should help the cause. I mean, this is a mandatory step. Like we cannot public funding alone is not enough, so we need to mobilize as much as possible private investment. And the idea of the strategy is to do so through the different initiatives are proposing. As I mentioned before, it's not going to be only about new funds. So we also would like to increase, existing networks. So an initiative that, for instance, I didn't mention concern the European corporate networks, because also there is a huge potential. Unfortunately, corporate investment is still pretty low in the European Union. So an idea is try to establish this new network in order to strengthen ties and increase the involvement and collaboration between established corporates and startup and scale-ups. And also what we would like to do, what we propose is to strengthen the connection between startup and scale-ups and investors. So for instance, business agents, individuals that have the resources and would like to reach out to companies, but they struggle to get in contact, to identify the companies where they could invest and so on. So all the initiatives that we are foreseeing are looking in this direction, and hopefully this will help to reduce, if not closing, at least reduce significantly the gap that we observe with the US.
U hekk nagħlqu l-ewwel episodju minn din is-sensiela li qegħdin niddedikaw lill-startups u scale-up strategy. Nixtiequ nirringrazzjaw lil Valentina di Girolamo mill-Kummissjoni Ewropea li ħadet sem u għamlet dik il-preżentazzjoni. Jekk xejn l-istrateġija turi l-impenn tal-Unjoni Ewropea biex toħloq ambjent aktar kompetittiv u dinamiku għall-startups madwar l-Unjoni Ewropea. Iżda kif tobsru, mhux kollox wartu żgħar, speċjalment fejn jidħol l-aċċess għall finanzjament, lekk imsejjaħ 28 reġim, irridu naraw daqsxejn kif se jkun qiegħed jaħdem, għadna ma nafux. Dawn il-kwistjonijiet se nkunu qegħdin nindirizzawhom fil-podcast illi imiss il-ġimgħa d-dieħla meta se nkunu qegħdin nitkellmu ma' atturi, players, esperti lokali dwar din l-istrateġija u xi tfisser għal Malta. Allura jekk inti investitur, jekk inti startup, jekk inti scale-up, jekk inti għandek investiment li tixtieq li tkompli tħaddem fis-snin li ġejjin nistennuk issegwi il-podcast tagħna li jmiss. Grazzi, niltaqgħu il-ġimgħa d-dieħla. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġġub lilkom minn Reaps Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll blajnuna ta' Finance Malta. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast huwa produzzjoni ta' The Malta Business Bureau, kontenut Mario Xpiereb, assistenza teknika Ralf Grima. The Malta Business Bureau hija l-fera ta' konsulenza ta' The Malta Chamber of Commerce u l-Malta Hotels and Restaurants Association.